Natalie Hayes presses her face to the small shuttle window of the Academy transport, watching the starfield stretch into blurred light trails. This is not the first time Natalie Hayes has left Earth, but it is her first time coming to the Galactic Academy, famed and infamous for having once overlooked all of humanity. Natalie Hayes, former disaster rescue soldier, is now a guest instructor whose own job title still feels unbelievable to her. The hollow recruitment signal reached Natalie Hayes in the middle of a wildfire operation as she directed evacuees beneath a sky of blazing red. In the hollow recording, Chancellor Zephyriel appears, tall and slender with multicolored glowing eyes, introducing themselves to Natalie Hayes in an intensely serious tone. Chancellor Zephyriel invites Natalie Hayes to the Galactic Academy to teach an entirely new subject, intergalactic extreme environment survival. Natalie Hayes had chuckled, thinking it was a colleague's prank, until the secured seal of the Galactic Union appeared at the end of the message. Aboard the shuttle now, Natalie Hayes recalls the reports about Cadet Chen, who forced the entire xenobiology department to rewrite its curriculum from scratch. In her mind, Natalie Hayes thinks that if Cadet Chen is the living proof Earth is not impossible, then she will be the next test of what Deathworlders can actually teach the galaxy. The shuttle shudders gently as it nears the orbit of the Galactic Academy, a massive luminous ring structure encircling a white dwarf star. Through the window, Natalie Hayes sees hundreds of ships of every design docking and departing, bearing students from dozens of different civilizations. Natalie Hayes draws a deep breath, remembering standing on avalanche ridges in the Andes and reminding herself that any fear can be learned to face. As the shuttle locks into its bay, a comm channel opens with the Academy's AI voice, politely outlining the reception protocol for Instructor Hayes. The hatch opens into a wash of soft white light, where Chancellor Zephyriel waits with a retinue of multi-species attendants. Natalie Hayes descends, her simple gray flight suit looking rough beside the glowing, intricate garments of the representatives of many worlds. Chancellor Zephyriel steps forward, extending long, slender hands in the handshake gesture the diplomatic corps learned from humans to greet Natalie Hayes. Natalie Hayes grips Chancellor Zephyriel's hand with her rescue worker firmness, making Zephyriel sway slightly before giving a puzzled smile. Together they walk along a glass corridor overlooking space, where research modules, dormitories, and simulation arenas orbit rhythmically around the white dwarf. Chancellor Zephyriel explains to Natalie Hayes that after the Cadet Chen incident, the Academy was forced to admit serious flaws in its habitability models. Therefore, Chancellor Zephyriel says they want Natalie Hayes not only to teach survival skills, but also to help the Academy understand the evolutionary logic of a death world like Earth. Natalie Hayes listens, half curious and half wary, hearing clearly the strategic scent of an entire civilization behind the academic invitation. The great doors of the main lecture hall open before them, revealing hundreds of tiered seats preparing to welcome the first Deathworld instructor. From the highest tier of the hall, Professor Vexara quietly observes Natalie Hayes with the gaze of someone who once labeled humans impossible in her thesis. Natalie Hayes steps up to the podium, setting her worn rescue backpack on a desk crowded with gleaming hollow devices at the center of the hall. She looks up, smiles at the entire hall, and greets the students in the warm, steady voice of someone who once shouted in blizzards, but now chooses to speak very slowly. In that moment, Natalie Hayes realizes she carries not only the survival experience of one Earth human, but also a way for the entire galaxy to relearn how to face what it once feared. The next morning, Natalie Hayes stands alone in the temporary instructor's quarters, slowly opening the old rescue backpack she brought up from Earth. Natalie Hayes lays each item from the backpack onto the table. A worn climbing rope, carabiners, bandages, and a scratched metal whistle. As her fingers run along the rope, Natalie Hayes thinks of the countless times she used these simple things to haul people out of avalanches and mudslides. The Academy's chime sounds, reminding Natalie Hayes that only 15 minutes remain until her first class with multi-species
15 minutes
students.
to class.
Natalie Hayes zips up her dark gray instructor suit and clips the old rescue whistle to her belt, as if it were an essential part of the uniform. Outside in the corridor, Professor Vekshara is already waiting, 4 arms cradling a stack of hollow slates and wearing an expression half curious, half nervous as she sees Natalie Hayes emerge.
Critical.
Professor Vekshara gently
exactly
reminds
are we
Natalie
looking at
Hayes
here,
that many
Professor?
students in the class have very fragile bodies and have
These
never
tolerances
experienced temperatures or
apply
winds beyond
uniformly
Academy
across
safety
all known
norms.
species,
Natalie Hayes
which
nods,
simplifies
but
our
in her mind those
projections.
safety norms sound more
So-
like slightly unpleasant weather than real danger. As the two enter the lecture hall, Natalie Hayes sees hundreds of students of every shape filling the tiered seats, all eyes focused on the podium. Natalie Hayes immediately spots student Mirella, a slender silicon being whose body resembles a crystal column clutching a recording device in the mid-rows. Next to student Mirella sits student Kaylor, a methane-breathing student in bulky bio-armor with trembling antennae from excitement. On the upper tier, student Silara, a photosynthetic student with softly glowing pale green skin, is adjusting a tiny recording drone hovering at her shoulder. Natalie Hayes walks to the center podium, sets her old rescue backpack on the desk, then uses a hollow stylus to write Deathworld Survival 101 in midair. The hall murmurs when the word Deathworld appears, and student Kaylor lets out excited bubbling sounds, while student Mirella trembles like a vibrating pane of glass. Natalie Hayes smiles faintly, introduces herself as a former Earth rescue worker, and says that today they will not talk theory, but start with a simple, practical exercise. From the corner of the room, Dr. Helian Andros, the station's chief medical officer, stands with arms folded beside a row of life sign monitors, listening intently to every word from Natalie Hayes. Professor Vekshara clears her throat to cut through the whispers, then announces that this class will move to Environmental Simulation Arena 3 for exercises under medical supervision.
It's just
Natalie Hayes looks over the hall and smiles, saying that today's simple practical is merely a light snowstorm simulation by Earth standards.
It's
Half the
live.
students immediately open danger rating interfaces, and student Silara hurriedly switches her drone to live record mode, to miss none of the reactions. The line of students files out of the hall, following Natalie Hayes and Professor Vekshara through curved corridors
Welcome
where
to
the
the
massive simulation
simulation arena.
module comes into view behind glass. Outside Environmental Simulation Arena 3, Dr. Helian Andros waits with a row of stretchers, medical equipment, and a multi-species nurse team standing at attention. Dr. Helian Andros pulls Natalie Hayes
You'll be
aside and
all right.
lowers his voice, reminding her that every sensor in the arena is set to alarm at very early
Yes,
thresholds
I
for
believe
student
so.
safety. Natalie Hayes nods and asks them to trust that she will stop the exercise immediately if she sees any student pushed beyond their limit. The doors to Simulation Arena 3 open, revealing a vast domed space with gas projectors, wind arrays, and a terrain floor coated in artificial ice. Natalie Hayes instructs the students to don standard Academy protective suits, while she herself only pulls on a thick dark blue jacket. Student Mirella stands motionless for a long moment before the gear rack, the light within her body flickering
Remember to
uneasily at the
trust your
prospect of
instincts.
entering cold and high
Always
winds.
stay focused on
Natalie
your
Hayes walks over and gently suggests
ready for
that student
this.
Mirella treat this as an experiment to understand her own limits, not a ranking test. Student Kaylor has long
They
since sealed his
invented
pressure
ice
suit
skating.
and, antennae quivering with excitement, asks Natalie Hayes if they will get a chance to slide on ice like in human recreational videos. Student Silara reactivates her recording drone, sets up a channel called Extreme Environment Survival, Practical 1, and tags instructor Natalie Hayes in the title. Once all are ready, Natalie Hayes steps into the center of the arena, raises her hand to start the simulation, and the air instantly turns frigid as wind tears across the icy surface. To Natalie Hayes, this feels like a snowstorm barely strong enough to be annoying, but for many students, each gust is already the border between calm and panic. Student Mirella immediately activates surface structure reinforcement, the light within her body blinking rapidly as she struggles to balance without cracking. Student Kaylor slips within the first few steps, armored body rolling once across the ice before popping back up, chuckling through his voice modulator. Student Solara struggles to keep the drone steady in the wind, her own ragged breathing loud on the recording as the footage shakes with each cold gust impact. Natalie Hayes blows a sharp, clean whistle blast, signaling all students to cluster into groups, lower their centers of gravity, and move as solid units instead of scattered individuals. Natalie Hayes physically pulls student Morella closer to student Kaylor and a few others, placing a hand on each of their shoulders so they can feel stability transmitted through mechanical contact. From the control room above, Dr. Helion Andros watches the life sign screens fill with rising heart rate graphs, his eyes wide, yet still not at the threshold to halt the simulation. Professor Vekshara stands beside Dr. Helion Andros, taking non-stop notes about the students' collective adjustment behavior under the guidance of a Deathworld factor like Natalie Hayes. A sudden strong gust lashes across, sliding the entire group several meters, and student Kaylor is nearly flung out of formation until Natalie Hayes yanks him back with the old climbing rope. Safety alarms flash momentarily in the control room, but Dr. Helion Andros sees student Kaylor's lifeline stabilize again as he bursts out laughing inside his armor. After several minutes of moving in formation, most students' breathing and heart rates ease, and student Morella realizes she can stand firm in the wind if she keeps pace with Natalie Hayes' group. Natalie Hayes signals to reduce the wind and end the simulation, leaving the group of students gasping on the ice, some collapsing into seated positions and laughing at having survived the simple exercise. As they leave the arena, student Solara replays the early footage and notices the tremble in her own voice, starkly contrasted with Natalie Hayes' calm guidance over the comm. Student Morella lightly touches the remaining ice on her glove, noting that the feeling of fear did not vanish, but became more structured when accompanied by Natalie Hayes' instructions. In the medical lounge, Dr. Helion Andros reports to Professor Vekshara that not a single student crossed into dangerous physiological zones, though many brushed right against the edge of their fear regions. Professor Vekshara studies the data and admits to Dr. Helion Andros that her old models never accounted for the factor of a Deathworld instructor directly participating in student survival behavior. At the same time, student Solara accidentally leaves the sharing mode on public for the practical one with instructor Natalie Hayes video, and a spreading fast icon begins blinking on the Academy network interface. Back in the instructor's room, Natalie Hayes sees the alert about a sudden spike in views attached to her name and realizes that this morning's little exercise has just sparked another storm, the storm of debate across the entire Galactic Academy. The video Practical One with instructor Natalie Hayes spreads across the Academy's internal network within hours, accompanied by countless comments of both horror and excitement. On the far side of the station, in an armored command room, Admiral Varanus replays the footage with eyes sharp as blades. Admiral Varanus slow plays the moment when Natalie Hayes uses the climbing rope to haul student Kaylor back and freezes the frame as the group refuses to break formation. Capacity to maintain structure under extreme pressure, Admiral Varanus mutters, adding Natalie Hayes' name to a new strategic dossier. A priority icon flashes on Chancellor Zephyriel's display, notifying them that Admiral Varanus requests an emergency meeting with Academy leadership about strategic application potential. In an oval meeting room near the station's core, Chancellor Zephyriel, Admiral Varanus, Professor Vekshara, and Dr. Helion Andros sit around a floating hollow table. An image of Natalie Hayes amid the simulated snowstorm hovers above the table, with rings of survival data orbiting like tiny planets. Admiral Varanus points to the graphs, emphasizing that Natalie Hayes raised the students' tolerance thresholds to nearly double the model's predictions. Dr. Helion Andros confirms that although many students were frightened, none crossed into physiological danger thanks to how Natalie Hayes managed formation and pacing. Professor Vekshara admits discomfort at seeing the video spread like an entertainment clip, yet cannot deny the training effectiveness of Natalie Hayes. Admiral Varanus proposes moving Deathworld Survival 101 under the oversight of the Military Assessment Division, with Natalie Hayes as an official strategic advisor. Chancellor Zephyriel narrows their multicolored eyes, reminding everyone that the Galactic Academy is a shared educational institution, not a mercenary training center. Admiral Varanus replies that war will not wait for the Academy to update its curriculum, and if the galaxy does not learn to survive like Natalie Hayes, they will always be weaker than other Deathworlds. Dr. Helion Andros interjects, stressing that Natalie Hayes designs her exercises to protect lives, not to maximize harm. Professor Vexera suggests a middle ground. Allow Natalie Hayes to keep teaching at the Academy, but permit Admiral Varanus to assign military observers to attend. Chancellor Zephyriel tentatively accepts this option, but demands that all of Natalie Hayes' materials be archived as open academic resources rather than classified documents. Admiral Varanus nods reluctantly, telling himself that as long as he can access Natalie Hayes' class, the military will eventually find ways to use that knowledge. As the meeting disperses, Chancellor Zephyriel issues an internal notice requesting Natalie Hayes' presence in the roundtable room within the hour. In the instructor quarters, Natalie Hayes is reviewing comments on the video when the summons icon appears before her, blinking deep blue. Natalie Hayes opens the message and reads the attendee list for the meeting. Chancellor Zephyriel, Admiral Varanus, Professor Vexera, and Dr. Helion Andros. This is no longer just about one practical, Natalie Hayes thinks to herself, straightening her back and shutting off all comment feeds. While Natalie Hayes prepares to leave her room in the student sector, Student Morella, Student Kaylor, and Student Solara are arguing intensely about the meaning of the practical. Student Kaylor insists that after a few more sessions like that with Natalie Hayes, they could volunteer for rescue missions in the most extreme zones. Student Morella worries that pushing a fragile body like hers to the edge could set a dangerous precedent if the military steps in to claim Natalie Hayes. Student Solara says that judging by how fast the video is spreading, protecting the course from the military is probably already too late, and the best they can do now is ensure Natalie Hayes' voice is heard clearly. Student Kaylor suggests that if the military wants to attend the class, they should sit with the students and follow the safety rules that Natalie Hayes sets. Student Morella nods softly, telling herself that if anyone can hold the line between survival training and war training, it is probably Natalie Hayes. At that moment, Natalie Hayes steps into the roundtable room and sees Chancellor Zephyriel, Admiral Varanus, Professor Vexera, and Dr. Helion Andros already waiting. Chancellor Zephyriel invites Natalie Hayes to sit and states plainly that the military wants to tie her course to a Special Forces training program. Admiral Varanus adds that no one understands Deathworlds and survival limits like Natalie Hayes, so using her experience to protect the galaxy is only logical. Natalie Hayes listens in silence, then says she came here to reduce the number of deaths and disasters, not to increase the killing efficiency of any army. Dr. Helion Andros nods gently in agreement with Natalie Hayes, quietly reminding them that medicine and survival always begin with the principle of protecting life. Professor Vexera tells Natalie Hayes that the Academy has agreed to let the military send observers into her class, but the teaching focus remains under her control. Chancellor Zephyriel asks Natalie Hayes whether she accepts this arrangement on the condition that all materials be shared openly with all civilizations, not only the military. Natalie Hayes considers for a few breaths, then replies that if survival knowledge must be used in war, at least all the weaker parties should have an equal chance to learn it. Admiral Varanus acknowledges Natalie Hayes' answer, yet a calculating glint remains in his eyes as he imagines units trained to Deathworld standards. Chancellor Zephyriel concludes the meeting by declaring that from now on, Deathworld Survival 101 will be the pilot course for a new educational direction in the Galactic Academy. As Natalie Hayes leaves the roundtable room, she notices a few young officers in uniform in the corridor, pretending to study notice boards while actually glancing at her. Natalie Hayes gives a half smile, thinking that if they want to see someone from a Deathworld, they will also have to learn to hear things they do not want to hear. In the student lounge, a new notification appears on the devices of Student Morella, Student Kaylor, and Student Solara, announcing that military observers will be attending Natalie Hayes' class from the next session. Student Kaylor jumps up in excitement at the prospect of watching soldiers learn to crawl on ice under Natalie Hayes' orders. Student Morella, meanwhile, looks at the military emblem with some unease, but then touches the line, "Instructor, Natalie Hayes," as a silent reassurance. Student Solara replays Practical 1 and murmurs that the next storm Natalie Hayes will face is probably not wind and ice, but the politics of a frightened galaxy. 3 days after the snowstorm practicum, Natalie Hayes receives a notice that her class will have its first field deployment to the planet High-Star 4. High-Star 4 is described in the Academy's files as a world too hazardous for routine survey, suitable only for autonomous robotics. Natalie Hayes reads the participant list and sees the names Student Morella, Student Kaylor, Student Solara, along with a new name, Commander Darvian. The annotation for Commander Darvian clearly states that he is a military observer assigned by Admiral Varanus to accompany the field trip.
Commander Darvian.
Natalie Hayes closes the file, thinking that if the military wants to see a Deathworld beyond textbooks, they will have to step onto the surface of a near-nightmare planet themselves.
The stars will still be there.
In the mission briefing room, Professor Vekshara presents a model of High-Star 4 as a dull gray sphere wrapped in electrical storms and seismic scars. Professor Vekshara explains that High-Star 4 has a thin atmosphere, extreme day-night temperature shifts, and ongoing seismic activity. Dr. Helian Andros adds that all students are required to wear full protective suits and that all life sign parameters will be monitored continuously. Commander Darvian, in a black light armor uniform, leans against the wall and watches Natalie Hayes with an unreadable, curious gaze. Natalie Hayes raises her hand to speak, proposing that the field trip should not just be an endurance test, but a lesson in reading hazardous environments to reduce risk. Professor Vekshara agrees and allows Natalie Hayes to choose the surface route on High-Star 4 that best fits the training goals. Student Morella sits quietly at the edge of the table, inner light flickering as she imagines High-Star 4's rough surface and tremors. Student Kaylor practically vibrates with excitement, asking if they will be allowed to touch real rock on a planet once marked off-limits for survey. Student Solara quietly adjusts her recording drone settings, renaming the session Field Mission 1, High-Star 4, with instructor Natalie Hayes. On the landing pad, Natalie Hayes stands with Student Morella, Student Kaylor, Student Solara, Professor Vekshara, Dr. Helian Andros, and Commander Darvian around a small craft with sturdy landing legs. Natalie Hayes rechecks each student's helmet seals and oxygen feed, letting her hand rest a moment longer on Student Morella's shoulder as a pre-departure reassurance. Commander Darvian boards first, checking the stun weapons and safety tethers mounted in the lander cabin, his gaze sliding over Natalie Hayes in silent assessment. As the craft departs the station, Student Kaylor presses his faceplate to the window, watching the Academy shrink behind them while High-Star 4 grows ahead. Through the viewport, Natalie Hayes sees High-Star 4 as a pale gray sphere streaked with flashes of electrical storms across its dark surface. Professor Vekshara quietly notes that within a few hours, their landing zone will sit right on the edge of a mild but continuous seismic band. Natalie Hayes smiles half-jokingly, remarking that mild but continuous seismic sounds like a decent mid-level mountain trail back on Earth. The craft shakes hard as it punches through High-Star 4's thin atmosphere, making Student Solara grip her harness while the recording drone crackles with interference. When the lander touches down on a cracked gray rocky surface, a light tremor ripples through the hull like a drumbeat announcing their arrival in the danger zone. The hatch opens, revealing a flat, rubble-strewn expanse under a murky gray sky with distant lightning forked across the horizon. Natalie Hayes is the first to step off the craft, planting her boot on High-Star 4's rock as if testing the firmness of an outdoor stairway back on Earth. Student Kaylor follows, exclaiming that real rock feels completely different from simulation floors, even with everything subtly shaking from tremors. Student Morella steps out slowly, feeling tremors roll through her body like deep sound waves, her inner light wavering but not shattering. Student Solara adjusts the drone to fly low beside the group, the lens sweeping past cracked ground and distant lightning like a live report from the edge of a death world. Natalie Hayes leads the group in a single file, asking everyone to keep enough distance to avoid colliding but close enough to help if someone slips. Commander Darvian brings up the rear, occasionally glancing back toward the horizon as if expecting a threat beyond the environment itself. A stronger tremor suddenly hits, the ground shaking just enough to send loose stones skittering around the feet of Student Kaylor and Student Morella. Natalie Hayes quickly signals the group to lower their centers of gravity, pick the least fractured footholds, and pause for a few seconds until the quake subsides. Professor Vekshara mutters a note that the students' reactions under a Deathworld factor like Natalie Hayes are markedly different from initial model predictions. Dr. Helian Andros quickly checks life signs on a handheld device, seeing elevated heart rates still within range, then nods at Natalie Hayes over a private channel. Deeper in, they reach a shallow depression with long fissures where the surface vibrates like the slow heartbeat of the planet. Natalie Hayes selects a relatively stable patch in the depression and announces it will be their stop for teaching hazardous environment observation skills. Natalie Hayes asks each student to describe the risks they see around them, from fissured ground and slope angles to the distant electrical storms. Student Morella points out that small but dense cracks could signal a chain collapse risk if seismic activity increases. Student Kaylor observes that the basin's tilt could funnel loose rock down toward them if a tremor runs along the slope. Student Silara adds that the distant electrical storms could travel faster than predicted, dragging electromagnetic changes that would affect their equipment. Natalie Hayes uses her climbing rope to draw a circle on the ground, explaining that if any danger sign crosses a threshold, everyone must cluster inside this line for easier control and rescue. Commander Darvian is surprised to see Student Kaylor and Student Morella proactively repeating Natalie Hayes' instructions over the internal channel as if organizing their own small unit. Suddenly, a tremor much stronger than before shakes the depression, and several rocks on the slope begin rolling down as if to test the theory just outlined. Natalie Hayes immediately blasts her whistle and shouts the order to pull into the rope circle, placing herself on the rockfall side to keep the group tight behind her. A large rock slides into the rope's edge, scraping past the toe of Natalie Hayes' boot, before stopping as Student Morella emits a shiver like crystalline panting. From the basin rim, Student Silara's drone records the whole scene of the group clustering while Commander Darvian half shields his body against the rockfall alongside Natalie Hayes. Once the tremor eases, Dr. Helian Andros confirms over the shared channel that no one is injured, with life signs spiking and now trending back toward stable. Professor Vekshara stands in the rope circle and admits that without Natalie Hayes' organization, her old models would predict at least 2 students panicking out of position. Commander Darvian looks at Natalie Hayes and gives a short nod, saying that the way she handled the situation reminds him more of a battlefield rescue unit than a classroom. Natalie Hayes answers that on a Deathworld, the line between classroom and rescue situation has never been a clear boundary. As the group starts heading back toward the ship, Student Morella realizes she is trembling, less than when she first stepped onto High Star 4. Even though the tremors remain as a steady background beat. Student Kaylor is brimming with ideas about applying what they learned on High Star 4 to designing new disaster simulations for Natalie Hayes' course. Student Silara walks while commenting into the drone that the group's risk perception has changed after just a few hours of marching under Instructor Natalie Hayes' orders. In High Star 4's gray sky, lightning forks once more, but this time, Natalie Hayes sees it as visual notes in a lesson the galaxy has never bothered to attend. As the hatch closes behind them, Natalie Hayes thinks that the High Star 4 trip has proven one thing. If the galaxy wants to understand Deathworlders, it must be willing to step onto the very ground it once avoided. The field data from High Star 4 uploads into the Academy systems as soon as the lander carrying Natalie Hayes and the student team approaches the docking ring. In the science control room, Professor Vekshara and Dr. Helian Andros stand before a giant hollow wall where the students' survival graphs roll upward like waves. Professor Vekshara zooms in on the data segment from the strongest quake and sees heart rate lines spike then drop in sync with Natalie Hayes' commands. Dr. Helian Andros points at the chart, noting that fear does not vanish, but reorganizes into structured responses when Natalie Hayes leads. An Academy Analysis AI throws an error when trying to apply old habitability models to the High Star 4 data, displaying the message, "Results outside forecast frame."
Whistle command.
Professor Vekshara sighs and edits her notes from High Star 4, unsuitable for direct survey, to High Star 4, low-tier Deathworld testbed under supervision of Natalie Hayes.
Coordinated action.
In another large meeting room, the Academy's department heads convene urgently to hear Professor Vekshara present the High Star 4 report. The central holo shows Natalie Hayes' team clustered inside the rope circle as rocks tumble down, captioned Unplanned Scenario. A photonics department head skeptically asks whether Natalie Hayes
Instructor
deliberately led
Natalie
students
Hayes.
into danger zones to push the data higher.
Good
Professor
morning, esteemed
Vekshara
council
replies
members.
that the route Natalie
We
Hayes
convene
originally
today to
selected
discuss the
lay in a
recent
mild
anomalies
quake zone
detected in the
and that the
outer
rockfall was an unavoidable fluctuation in High Star 4's environment. An environmental sociology head points to the footage of students repeating Natalie Hayes' commands, calling it evidence of a new collective survival culture forming. Chancellor Zephyriel, seated at the head, listens intently to the debate, their multicolored eyes shifting hue slightly each time Natalie Hayes' name is mentioned. Dr. Helion Andros presents the biomedical section, showing that the students' fear zones contracted significantly after High Star 4, even for student Morella. Several department heads sigh, admitting that the old habitability models completely ignored the variable of direct Deathworld training. Meanwhile, in the station's military sector, Admiral Varanus receives a copy of the High Star 4 report and immediately opens the section on team tactical performance under Natalie Hayes. The metrics for formation retention under pressure, decision-making under high emotional strain, and compliance with survival commands all exceed military standards. Admiral Varanus thinks privately that if his troops had half the survival discipline of Natalie Hayes' students on High Star 4, the galactic borders would look very different. Admiral Varanus initiates a new project titled Deathworld Resilience Corps, its cover showing High Star 4 and the line, Proposed Advisor, Instructor Natalie Hayes. In the student wing, student Morella sits in a study room, replaying Histar 4 tremor data overlaid onto a map of her own body. Student Morella realizes that the zones once prone to cracking now respond more flexibly, as if the trip with Natalie Hayes taught her body to bend with, rather than fight against, seismic stress. Student Kaylor, meanwhile, occupies a simulation lab, Corner, prototyping a rockstorm scenario based on High Star 4 and sending a request asking if Natalie Hayes can use it in a future lesson. Student Solara edits Field Mission 1, High Star 4, with instructor Natalie Hayes, into a shorter cut with narration about shifting risk perception. Student Solara's condensed video is quickly used by other professors as a classroom example, causing the name Instructor Natalie Hayes to pop up in psychology, sociology, and strategy courses. Chancellor Zephyriel receives reports that the departments are citing the High Star 4 case as a Deathworld turning point in their revised curriculum. Under this pressure, Chancellor Zephyriel calls a special session of the Internal Galactic Academic Council at the Academy to reconsider the entire habitability framework. In the session, Professor Vekshara projects side-by-side profiles of 847 stable worlds and the new data from High Star 4 and Earth, stressing the massive deviation. A representative from the Union Psychological Council states that species in gentle conditions evolved risk-avoidant social structures, whereas Deathworlders like humans convert risk into an evolutionary engine. Admiral Varanus, invited as an observer, argues that if the galaxy does not adapt its theories to include Deathworlds, it will remain reactive and vulnerable to civilizations like humans. Several council members show fear at the phrase civilizations like humans, recalling that they are still recovering from the shock of having missed humanity for centuries. Chancellor Zephyriel calls them back to the scientific core by asking Professor Vekshara directly what the new habitability model must change. Professor Vekshara answers that they must add an entirely new branch for civilizations adapted in hostile environments, with Earth and Natalie Hayes' program as primary examples. An academic senator proposes that the Academy establish a long-term program called Extreme Adaptation Studies, co-founded by Natalie Hayes. The proposal immediately sparks two reactions. One side eager to expand understanding, another fearful of turning Deathworlds into weapons curricula. Admiral Varanus quietly notes that Extreme Adaptation Studies could become the best recruitment pool for his Deathworld Resilience Corps. As the session recesses, Chancellor Zephyriel sends a summary to Natalie Hayes, asking her to prepare thoughts on turning her class into the nucleus of the new program. In the faculty quarters, Natalie Hayes reads the summary and realizes that High Star 4 is no longer just a practicum, but has become the argument for an entire academic direction. Natalie Hayes recalls student Morella's tense face in the first cold simulation, then how student Morella stood more firmly on High Star 4, and wonders if the Academy truly understands what it is asking her to teach. In the student areas, student Kaylor excitedly tells student Solara that Extreme Adaptation Studies could become an official major under the guidance of Natalie Hayes. Student Solara replies that such a major would attract both the military and radical scientists, placing Natalie Hayes at the center of all the fault lines. Listening nearby, student Morella's inner light dims slightly as she thinks about how she has become less afraid thanks to Natalie Hayes, while others want to use that fear itself as a tool. That evening, Natalie Hayes opens a private holo channel with Professor Vekshara and Dr. Helian Andros to ask directly what they think of an Extreme Adaptation Studies program taught by her. Professor Vekshara admits that scientifically, this is an unprecedented chance to understand Deathworlds, but she is worried seeing Admiral Varanus already standing at the door. Dr. Helian Andros says that if Natalie Hayes agrees, he will request priority biomedical oversight of the entire program to ensure that preserving life remains the core goal. After listening, Natalie Hayes doesn't answer immediately, but instead stares for a long moment at the galactic map covered with systems labeled too hazardous for survey. Natalie Hayes thinks that if no one teaches the galaxy how to step into those red zones, decisions about Deathworlds will remain in the hands of those who either fear them or wish to weaponize that fear. Before closing the holo, Natalie Hayes tells Professor Vekshara and Dr. Helian Andros that if Chapter 6 of this story is stepping into a new program, she will only agree if it is called Extreme Adaptation, not Extreme Weaponization. A week after the council meeting, Natalie Hayes stands before the Academy's conference chamber doors, where the final vote on the Extreme Adaptation Studies program will be held.
Good morning,
On a wall
council
screen in the
members.
hallway, Natalie Hayes sees her name listed as co-founding proposer next to the Extreme Adaptation Studies entry. Natalie Hayes takes a deep breath, telling herself that if this
Instructor
program
Hayes,
exists,
your
it must
insights
save
are
more people
crucial
than
to our
those who
next
use it for
steps.
war. As Natalie Hayes enters, Chancellor
Civilian
Zephyriel,
survival,
Admiral Varanus, Professor
disaster
Vekshara,
response,
and Dr. Helian
and
Andros
ethics of
are already
extreme
present, along with
adaptation.
representatives from many departments. Chancellor
It is
Zephyriel
important
invites
to
Natalie
remember
Hayes to present her
what
final
connects
proposal for
these two
structuring
fields.
extreme adaptation studies. Standing in the center, Natalie Hayes opens a holo showing the program's structure with three pillars:
Instructor
civilian
Natalie
survival,
Hayes.
disaster response, and ethics of adaptation. Natalie Hayes emphasizes that any
This will
military
ensure
module wanting to
maximum
use her
safety.
materials must pass an ethics filter overseen by the
Affirmative.
Academic Council. Admiral Varanus mildly objects that wartime does not allow endless approval layers, yet his gaze carefully tracks each of Natalie Hayes' diagrams. Dr.
Open
Helian
access
Andros
campus,
proposes a clause
Instructor
that all
Natalie
practicals
Hayes,
under extreme
materials-
adaptation studies require direct biomedical oversight and emergency stop authority. Professor Vekshara adds that data from Natalie Hayes' program must be stored openly so weaker civilizations can access it
My
equally.
instructor,
Natalie Hayes looks at her three allies,
demonstrated a mastery
Chancellor
of
Zephyriel,
skills that
Professor
consistently
Vekshara,
impressed
and Dr. Helian
inspired me.
Andros, and realizes they are helping her draw the
Instructor
boundaries.
Hayes
A
showed
student
us what it meant
representative,
to lead,
student Solara,
even
is
on
invited
High
to speak
Star
about the
4.
experience of learning under Natalie Hayes on High Star 4. Student Solara says that if led by Natalie Hayes, extreme adaptation studies will not turn students into soldiers, but into people who understand their own limits.
Hayes' name up there.
From the observation tier, Student
Are you
Morella
sure?
watches images of herself trembling in the snowstorm and later standing firm on High Star 4 beside Natalie Hayes, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and worry.
Vote.
Student Kaler whispers to Student Morella that if Extreme Adaptation Studies passes, they will be Natalie Hayes' first founding class. After all comments, Chancellor Zephyriel declares that the Council will vote with 3 conditions attached to Natalie Hayes' proposal. Condition 1. All strategic applications derived from Natalie Hayes' program must be reported to both the Academic Council and the Union Psychological Council. Condition 2. Under Natalie Hayes' leadership, Extreme Adaptation Studies must prioritize rescue and civilian training, with purely military modules being secondary. Condition 3. Students from weaker worlds will receive scholarships and support to attend Natalie Hayes' courses on equal footing with those from stronger civilizations. Virtual ballots appear before each delegate, and Natalie Hayes stands silently watching icons turn green as approval votes accumulate. Finally, Chancellor Zephyriel announces that Extreme Adaptation Studies is officially approved, with Instructor Natalie Hayes as its first program director. Hearing Natalie Hayes' name echo through the translators, Student Morella's inner light shifts from anxious flickers to a steady pulse. Student Kaler pumps a fist into the air, accidentally triggering his suit's emotion record tag, logging excited next to Natalie Hayes' name.
Instructor Natalie Hayes.
Admiral Varanus remains still, but in his private files he updates the Deathworld Resilience Corps plan to academic coordination with Natalie Hayes' Extreme Adaptation Studies. After the session, Natalie Hayes is invited to a new lecture hall where the signage is being replaced with Extreme Adaptation Studies, Cohort Y. Inside, Natalie Hayes sees Student Morella, Student Kaler, and Student Celara seated in the middle rows, with several young officers in uniform waiting on the upper tier. Commander Darvian sits on the aisle, openly displaying his military insignia, but beside him lies a seismic rescue kit instead of a weapon. Natalie Hayes steps onto the podium, placing her old rescue backpack on the desk, this time beside the official Extreme Adaptation Studies logo. On the hollow behind her, Natalie Hayes, no wow, longer writes Deathworld Survival 101, but instead Extreme Adaptation Studies, with the subtitle, Learn to Survive to Keep Living, Not to Kill Better. Natalie Hayes introduces the program, explaining that they will study not only Earth and High Star 4, but also the skipped systems the Academy once deemed unworthy of visiting. Student Celara raises her hand to ask whether they will ever invite an instructor from a death world other than Earth to teach alongside Natalie Hayes. Natalie Hayes smiles and answers that if they learn well, perhaps one day the program's own students will be the ones to seek out and invite other death worlds. In the communications sector, Archivist Null 7 receives a request to set up a dedicated channel for Extreme Adaptation Studies, linked to probes near 2 dangerous systems. Archivist Null 7 silently clicks her mandibles, thinking that if they had such a channel 400 years ago, both humanity's name and Natalie Hayes' might have appeared much earlier. A few weeks later, a faint signal from a system once labeled dead unexpectedly transmits a strange data string, structured like a map of extreme climates. Archivist Null 7 immediately forwards the packet to the Extreme Adaptation Studies channel with the note, Potential Alternate Death World. In her office, Natalie Hayes opens the packet and sees bands of temperature and pressure that even Earth would label extreme. Natalie Hayes squints, thinking of a day not far off when she will no longer be the first Death World instructor, but merely the one who opened the way for an entire generation of Death World teachers. Natalie Hayes sends a message to Student Morella, Student Kaler, Student Celara, and Commander Darvian, inviting them to join the first small team to decode the new Death World data. Before switching off the lights, Natalie Hayes looks one last time at the galactic map, where the red, too hazardous for survey zones now bear a new line. Under review by Extreme Adaptation Studies. Natalie Hayes thinks to herself that if one day the galaxy stops calling those places death worlds and instead calls them places we learn to survive, then her program will have done its job.